Ambassador William Taylor and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State George Kent painted a sobering portrait of a president using the power of his office to advance his personal political agenda by withholding military aid from a foreign power. Faced with that evidence, Republicans looked the other way, opting instead to press an alternative reality.
The whole point was you had a clear understanding that aid will not get released unless there's a commitment. Not maybe, not I think the aid might happen, and it's my hunch it's going to get released. You use clear language, clear understanding, and commitment, and those two things didn't happen, so you had to be wrong.
No pressure, no demands, no conditions, nothing corrupt.
So not only no conversations with the President of the United States about Ukraine, you've not had any contact with the President of the United States.
For the millions of Americans viewing today, the two most important facts are the following. Number one, Ukraine received the aid. Number two, there was, in fact, no investigation into.
Well, today, speaking to reporters, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi responded to Republican criticism by inviting President Trump to participate, him, get in the conversation on the inquiry.
If the president has something that is exculpatory, Mr. President, that means you have anything that shows your innocence, then he should make that known. And that's part of the inquiry. And so far, we haven't seen that, but we welcome it.
Well, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy told reporters that he wouldn't support impeachment, even if new evidence confirms that President Trump demanded investigations into former Vice President Joe Biden. For more, I'm joined right now by Laurence Tribe, Harvard Law professor and co-author of To End a Presidency, The Power of Impeachment. Professor Tribe, what do you make, to start with, what do you make of the Republican alternate, well, I wouldn't call it a defense, alternate narrative yesterday?
Well, I think it's basically ridiculous. The fact is that if you solicit a bribe and are caught red-handed before you get the bribe, you're still committed bribery. And in this case, it was extortion as well as bribery. It was a clear abuse of power. And in any case, the history of the framing of the impeachment power is that George Mason, one of the framers, wanted to include, in addition to treason and bribery, a term like corruption. And in the end, instead of corruption, they used other high crimes and misdemeanors. And Mason said that was intended to capture, among other things, attempted subversion of the Constitution. So here we have actual as well as attempted subversion. For over 70 days, the aid was withheld. And if not for the whistleblower, if not for having been caught red-handed, the president would have gotten what he wanted. He would have wanted a public television appearance by President Zelensky smearing Biden and saying that we're investigating him. The only reason he didn't get that is that he was caught. And for him to say that I was caught and so it doesn't matter is really a desperate and unconvincing move. The question is, will the people of this country accept it? Will they accept that it's okay to use your official power to hurt an ally and help an adversary just because you're caught before you hurt the adversary any longer? And I don't think the American people will buy that, but then maybe I'm just too optimistic.
Well, Trump doesn't have a very good historic sense about anything, our culture, anything. But I was wondering, I'm trying to be really fine here in understanding this, because I grew up with LBJ, and LBJ used the power of the presidency to reward people. He would close certain naval bases and keep others open, depending on who he liked that week. We knew that kind of use of presidential discretion on Article 2. Tell us what's the difference between that and what Trump's doing, or what he's done here with Ukraine.
It's very different. First of all, this is national security and it's foreign affairs. And secondly, this is a case where Congress specifically said that this $400 million and the Javelin missiles should go to Ukraine in order to protect this ally against the encroachments of Russia, the encroachments of Vladimir Putin. And Congress specifically said that the money shouldn't go until the Pentagon certifies that corruption will not get in the way of delivering the money the way we intend it to be used. That certification was given. So the president violated what Congress had specified. He violated the power of the purse. He usurped the power of the purse. and he did it in a way that solicited foreign assistance for his reelection, which was itself a criminal violation of the laws protecting the sanctity of our electoral process. We've had corrupt presidents before, presidents who have trimmed the sails this way or that, but we've never had somebody whose whole purpose in holding that office is to enrich himself and enhance the power of his family and the wealth of his family. This is not just a marginal violation. This is essentially an anti-president. And I'm not talking only about his policies. His policies are a different matter altogether. It wouldn't matter if this was Obama or Clinton, any president. Just ask the Republicans if a Democratic president in the future takes money that you have appropriated for a particular foreign purpose and then threatens to withhold it and watch people die on the battlefield until he gets what he wants for his reelection. Would you like to live with that? Is that the kind of country we want? It's not the kind of country I believe that we want or that our framers envisioned. And I think it's about time that people pay more attention to the Constitution and to the purposes of our democracy than to the trivial business of getting reelected. If your office is so important to you that you're going to violate your oath and vote for someone who violates his oath every day and who uses the office of the presidency to enrich himself and to enhance his power, then I really think you are a pathetic excuse for a human being.
Well, as a citizen, I love the way you put together the absolute immorality of this with its unconstitutional behavior, because the idea of letting people die so that you get a little dirt on your opponent is about as corrupt as you can imagine. Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.